Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Nurse Reviews Cells at Work Code Black. So today we are looking at episode number 9 called Calamity, Athlete's Foot, and the Meaning of Work. So the episode title is, again, kind of spoiling what we're going to be looking at this episode, and I have to be honest with you, athlete's foot is not quite as exciting as something like pulmonary emboli, at least to me. I don't know about you guys. And also I did take a little bit of a break from Cells at Work last week, more to produce just another video on another topic. If you want to go check it out, it's on Michael-san Shin Omakanai-san. And also it's just been a little bit busy at work because we have officially entered the third wave of the COVID-19 pandemic here in Ontario. And unlike the past 2 waves, it has been hitting my region a lot harder than ever before, really. So we've even had outbreaks at my hospital, so it's been a little bit busy. So yeah, today my drink of choice is coffee because I rode the overtime train again this week. But yeah, let's dive right back into Cells at Work.
そういえば最近勃起させてないですね。ストレスで血管が収縮して十分な血液が送れないせいだろうな。 昔は毎朝の恒例行事だったってのに。
Alright, so reduced blood flow, especially to the more peripheral areas like your feet, for example. We call that peripheral vascular disease, or just PVD for short, because if you haven't noticed, we shorten everything in medicine. So generally, if we see somebody with PVD, they usually have a very unhealthy lifestyle over many years. So some of the risk factors for PVD include smoking, which is what this host body does, diabetes, high blood pressure, which I'm pretty sure this body probably has, as well as like obesity and high cholesterol and all those things. So yeah, it's not good. People with peripheral vascular disease will often have very cold limbs that are being affected, as well as they're at high risk for something that we call neuropathy. So neuropathy is any sort of damage to the nerve cells. When those nerve cells aren't getting proper blood flow due to peripheral vascular disease, then those nerve cells start to be damaged as well. So like I said, the feet are very commonly affected by peripheral vascular disease, and as a result, they're also common sites for things like neuropathy. This is why people with neuropathy are highly encouraged to regularly check their feet for wounds or injuries, because with that decreased sensation due to the damaged nerve cells, they won't necessarily know that they have like a cut or an ulcer or anything like that to their foot, which can become easily infected.
白癬菌、自然界に多く存在する真菌、カビの一種。皮膚の角質内に侵入し、かゆみなどを引き起こす。高温多湿の環境を好む。
Ringworm. So ringworm is a bit of a misnomer. As Kenjiro Tsuda said, it's actually a fungus, and actually it's not just one specific type of fungus. It can actually be caused by different species, which I will list here because I cannot pronounce them properly or I will just like butcher them. Anyway, the reason why it's called ringworm is because the classic lesion with a ringworm infection is like this raised scaly ring with sort of like this red flat interior around the inside. And then those can get large and swollen and whatnot, but yeah, the typical lesion is circular. So I imagine that's how it got its name. But yeah, it's just a fungus.
白血球の数が圧倒的に足りない。
少し前まではかなりの数の白血球がいたはずですが。
そう見えたのはストレス状況下で数の増えた細菌と戦うため一時的に白血球が増員されていたからだ。だが今や度重なるウイルスや細菌との戦いで骨髄で生成される白血球の数を消費される白血球の数が上回ってしまったのだ。
The condition that we're talking about here is called neutropenia, or a decreased white blood cell count. He's absolutely right that when you have a really bad infection, the body will respond by increasing the production of white blood cells. And we can actually pick that up just with some basic blood work at the hospital or in a lab or whatever. If somebody comes to us in the hospital just kind of not feeling too good, we can do some blood work, do a complete blood cell count, and if we see an increase in white blood cells, then we can generally infer that the body is dealing with some form of infection or is in some form of inflammatory state. Then we can correlate this with other data. So say, for example, if the patient has a fever, then yeah, we will probably start to assume that you are having an infection of some sort. Now, as you can imagine, the body can't just produce new cells like this. It does take some time to sort of recuperate all those energies. So then actually what we do see if an infection is particularly severe or prolonged, we start to see what we call a left shift. So when this occurs, we start to see an increased amount of what we call blast cells. So blast cells are just immature cells. So when you have immature white blood cells, they just don't really operate quite as efficiently, but the bone marrow is just trying to pump out white blood cells as quickly as possible, so it starts sending out white blood cells that have not quite matured yet. I remember back in nursing school, one of my classmates actually came up with a really good analogy that has stuck with me for many, many years. So you can imagine your mature white blood cells as tigers. They are big, they're ferocious, and they are really good at hunting and killing their prey. Now those immature blast cells are like tiger kittens. So yeah, maybe they can do a little bit of work, but ultimately they are not as good at hunting and killing down their prey. So yeah, it's not an ideal state to be in, and once we start seeing that left shift, then we start to get tipped off that maybe the body is not coping so well with the infection. We also discussed a little bit in previous episodes, but immunity can also be affected by other things, for example, chronic stress. And so once you start piling up all these risk factors on top of each other, that's when you start seeing the more severe side effects of that.
確かに少ないな。
これもきっと喫煙やアルコールの影響。鉄分が不足して赤血球の生成が追いついてないんだ。
すれ違う赤血球も減ってる気がするもんな。
All right, so iron deficiency anemia. Anemia is basically a decrease in your red blood cell count or your hemoglobin. So iron deficiency anemia is the most common cause of anemia because there are different causes. But anyway, iron deficiency anemia. It's actually more common in women only because women actually just bleed every month. Again, it sucks being a woman sometimes. I swear it's not fair. But yeah, most women are actually just a little bit anemic because we lose blood every single month. So causes of iron deficiency anemia besides bleeding every month is usually related to nutrition. So people who are just not taking in enough iron through their diet or are unable to absorb the iron in their stomach or gastrointestinal system for whatever reason. Now, if you're wondering why iron is so important, it's because iron is the main component of hemoglobin, which is the part of the red blood cell that carries oxygen. Now, if you don't have iron, then you cannot make hemoglobin, which means you can't make red blood cells. So then you end up with anemia.
水虫または足白癬。白癬菌が足の指や裏などの皮膚の角質を侵食し、炎症などが起きる感染症。皮膚のかゆみや痛みなどを引き起こす。
So athlete's foot. Athlete's foot, like we said earlier, is caused by ringworm, which we discussed earlier. And I don't know if this is a translation error, but it is not a bacteria. It is a fungi. So if you remember back to biology class, there's like kingdom Animalia, kingdom Plantae, kingdom Protozoa, kingdom Fungi, and I think there's like 2 bacterial kingdoms. I can't remember. They keep switching that around. Anyway, it is not a bacteria. You cannot treat fungal infections with antibiotics because antibiotics only work on bacteria. So that is probably a mistranslation. I imagine they call it athlete's foot because this fungus, like we heard here, tends to thrive in very hot and moist environments. So things like a locker room and shared showers very much fit that description. All it takes is for an infected person's foot to touch a shared surface, so for example, a shared shower, and then an uninfected person to come by and touch that same surface with their foot, and bam, they have a new infection, and now they're infecting everyone else too. As we see here, getting ringworm infections in different areas of the same body is actually not uncommon. Like I said, it's stupidly contagious. All you have to do is say, scratch your foot, because it's itchy from the ringworm, and then say scratch your crotch, and there, boom. Now you have an infection in your crotch area as well.
ブテナフィン塩酸塩、心筋またはカビの細胞膜の合成に必要な物質の生成を阻害する。それにより心筋は細胞内の物質が外に流出してしまい殺菌される。
Alright, so the treatment for athlete's foot is relatively straightforward. You just use antifungal cream. That's it. However, there is sort of this underlying concern that the episode kind of touches on, but they don't really discuss quite so much. So like I said, superficial fungal infections of the skin or the nail are generally easy to treat and not very serious. That doesn't mean that fungal infections can't be serious. If those fungal infections get inside the body for whatever reason, then that becomes much more of an issue and can become incredibly serious. Most of us with functional immune systems will never really have to fight off a systemic serious fungal infection. It is those who are immunocompromised who have to worry about those serious fungal infections. So for example, patients who are undergoing chemotherapy for cancer, people who are on medications that suppress their immune system for like autoimmune disorders, or people with organ transplants, people with HIV and AIDS also fall under this umbrella. And in these populations, they are very, very susceptible to systemic fungal infections on the inside of their body, and their mortality rates for those are incredibly high. If you want to compare, there is a type of fungal lung infection called an Aspergillus pneumonia. This occurs when an immunocompromised host breathes in those Aspergillus fungal spores, and those fungal spores will settle in the lungs and cause a lung infection. The mortality rate for an Aspergillus pneumonia is anywhere from like 30 to 80%. It is incredibly deadly. If you'd like to compare, a typical pneumococcal pneumonia, which is a bacterial infection of the lung, the mortality rate is only about 20% in comparison. So yeah, the difference between that bacterial lung infection and that fungal lung infection is huge. Now, there's a few different reasons for this. The first is that people who get serious lung infections, like I said, are typically immunocompromised, so they don't have functional immune systems. This alone makes the mortality rate higher because the body just isn't able to cope with infections as well. The second aspect is that it's actually quite difficult to diagnose these infections. So these infections will go longer periods of time before being accurately diagnosed and treated. So those infections have a longer period of time to kind of grow and get worse. There's a couple of different reasons for that. So first is that with our current technology, it's really difficult to actually culture fungal specimens in a lab. It is typically slower and less accurate than, say, culturing a bacterial sample in the lab. Second, like I said, they're just not quite as common as, say, bacterial infections. So if a doctor sees evidence of pneumonia on a chest x-ray, for example, they're gonna probably assume it's a bacterial infection and start the patient on antibiotics, which, like I talked about, will not work on fungal infections. That antibiotic will end up not working, the patient will see no improvement in their symptoms, go back to the doctor, and the doctor is gonna start to suspect something else. But, you know, it's going to take at least a few days for that patient to go back to the doctor and say, hey doc, this medication's not working. So already that fungal infection is worse than when the patient initially presented to see the doctor. Other reason why fungal infections are so serious is because fungi have been around for a very long time. I remember once having a patient who had a very serious fungal infection in the blood, And the doctor who was treating her told me, you know, fungi have been around for billions of years and they have survived pretty well every disaster in this world, and they are still thriving. They are incredibly resilient and difficult to kill. I mean, they survived things like the Ice Age and like that meteor strike that killed off the dinosaurs. So yeah, they are strong. Another reason why fungal infections are so deadly is because we actually don't have that many treatments for them. Now, if you ask me to name 10 antibiotics off the top of my head, that would be absolutely easy. Like right away, I'd be able to name 10. If you ask me to name 10 antifungal treatments, I don't know if I could do it. I could probably name 5 off the top of my head, and that's about it. The reason for that boils down to the very cellular structure of a fungus. So when we start to think of fungi, we probably tend to think of them more like plants than animals, but it's actually the opposite. Fungi are closer to us as animals than any other kingdom out there. The way antibiotics work is that they exploit the differences between a bacteria cell and one of our cells because they are just completely different. Now, because fungal cells are similar to ours, it's much more difficult to exploit any differences between them, and therefore it becomes more difficult to find different therapies for them. Even when we do find certain antifungal medications, they tend to have more severe side effects than antibiotics. So for example, one of the stronger antifungal therapies is called amphotericin B, which works wonders on fungal infections, but unfortunately it causes a lot of side effects like fevers and chills, nausea, vomiting, all the way to even kidney and liver damage. So yeah, not fun. Even though this episode only discusses a very minor superficial fungal infection like athlete's foot, there is that wider implication that a decreased immune system could potentially lead to a more widespread or more severe fungal infection with a potentially high mortality rate.
測定部の白血球たちを他の白癬菌駆除に向かわせろ。
しかし今激戦を終えたばかりで。
無理は承知の上だ。だが人手が足りない今、残った者たちに働いてもらわねばならん。
This hits pretty close to home. So because of the COVID-19 outbreaks, both in the community as well as in the hospital, it means that we are basically working short-staffed because there are certain staff that have had to isolate either because they have COVID-19 symptoms or because they have been exposed to a COVID-19 patient. And that means a lot of people are not able to work. So you have the same work or more work because of the increased amount of cases, the higher amounts of acuity and things like that. So you have at least the same amount of work, but with less people to do the work. I know the units at the hospital I work at that are being affected, they have some staffing issues. So we've had to float nurses from like unaffected units to those units in order to help them out. But that unfortunately leaves their home units short-staffed as well, and it creates this ripple effect. And yeah, it means everybody has to work harder. The overtime on my unit this year has been astronomical due to staffing issues and things like that. And it means a lot of people are burning out and getting real tired. Coupled with that, on top of these lockdowns and things like that, it really wears down on your mental health. I know it's been hard for me. I have not seen my family and many of my friends in well over a year because I live alone, so you're not really supposed to see people outside of your household. And they also live in another city that's pretty far away. It's like in a different part of Ontario, and they have generally been hit harder than we have here. So it was just like too risky to go and see them through most of this pandemic. So yeah, it's been hard, and I know it's been hard on a lot of people too because of like financial constraints and things like that, and also just the isolation effects. And yeah, but you know what, hopefully with all these vaccinations going on, we'll be out of this shortly and we'll be able to return to our normal lives. But until then, stay strong, guys, and take care of yourselves, take care of your mental health. get enough sleep, eat properly, and look out for each other and be kind to each other. Because everybody is suffering in one way or another during this pandemic. So that concludes episode 9. So overall, a relatively easy episode with athlete's foot. I mean, not a particularly deadly disease, but like I said, fungal infections can absolutely be deadly, especially if your immune system is compromised, like we are starting to see here. I am told that the series gets worse, as in darker and more despair. So yeah, I'm both looking forward to it and not. So we shall see. I shall hopefully see you guys next week with the next video for the next episode, but we shall see how things go with the COVID-19 outbreaks and stuff like that. So yeah, don't blame me if the next video is a little bit late. Blame COVID-19. In any case, hope you guys learned something. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I shall see you all next time whenever that will be. Bye!